Hello boys and girls of grade 6. I am Miss Martina Archer Sample, and today in our science we're going to look at pollination. And we all would have heard about pollination in our previous grades. Pollination. Pollination is a transfer of pollen grains from the stamens, the flower parts that produce them, to the ovule, which are the bearing organs, or to the ovules themselves. In plants such as conifers and cycads, in which the ovules are exposed, the pollen is simply caught in a drop of fluid secreted by the ovule. In flowering plants, however, the ovules are contained within a hollow organ called a pistil, and the pollen is deposited on the pistil receptive surface, which is the stigma. There, the pollen germinates and gives rise to a pollen tube, which grows down through the pistil towards one of the ovules in its base. In fact, in the act of double fertilization, one of the two sperm cells within the pollen tube fuses with the egg cell of the ovule, making possible the development of an embryo, and the other cell combines with the two subsidiary sexual nuclei of the ovule, which initiates information of a reserve food tissue. The growing ovule then transforms itself into a seed. Here we're having pollination. Pollination taking place where the bee taking the pollen grain from one flower to another flower. Types of pollination. All plants having flowers completely rely on pollination method for reproduction. And there are two types of pollination. We have self-pollination and we have cross-pollination. Let us look a little at self-pollination. What is self-pollination? Self-pollination, it is referred to as the primary type of pollination, which is the most important type of pollination, as it includes a single flower. Self-pollination occurs when pollen grains fall directly from anther onto the stigma of the flower. This process is quite simple and fast, which leads to a reduction in genetic diversity as the sperm and the egg cells of the flower share some genetic information. Self-pollination, here we're having an image showing the pollination of a flower by pollen from the same flower or from another flower on the same plant. One, we're having the pollen, right? The pollen is going on to the stigma and the stigma then goes on to the anther. So number 1, pollen, number 2, stigma, and number 3, the anther. Cross-pollination. This type of pollination in which sperm-laden pollen grains are transferred from the corms or flowers of one plant to egg-bearing cones or flowers of another plant. Cross-pollination is found in both flowering plants and cone-bearing plants and facilitates cross-pollination and outbreeding. And here we're having an illustration showing cross-pollination where we have one flower and another flower where the pollen from one flower is being transported to the stigma of another flower, and the stigma of the other flower transfer it to the anther of the same flower. Cross-pollination occurs when pollen grains are transferred to a flower from a different plant. That is how we have cross-pollination, not the same flower, not the same plant. This movement of pollen may occur by wind, as in conifers, or via symbiotic relationships with various animals. Animals such as bees and certain birds and bats that carry pollen from one plant to another plant while feeding on its nectar. What is cross-pollination? Most plants that bear flowers reproduce through sexual reproduction. This means each seed comes from an ovule of that mother plant that was fertilized with pollen from the male plant. These special reproductive cells, called gamete, are produced and released in flowers. Cross-pollination. Cross-pollination is what happens when each gamete comes from different varieties within a plant. Cross-pollination is also called cross-fertilization. This almost always happens when two different varieties of the same species. In rare occasions, two plants that are more distantly related might also successfully cross-pollinate. Thank you, and this would have brought us to the end of our lesson looking at self-pollination and cross-pollination. I am Miss Martina Archer Semple saying bye for now.